Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, AWS Office Hours, Amazon GuardDuty Tips and Tricks. I'm Nathan Case, Senior Security Specialist at AWS, and I'm here today with Ryan Holland, Principal Security Specialist. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. On the left side of your screen, you will see a Q&A pod. Please submit your questions for our presenters and moderators at any time, and we will address them while they come in. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be several polling questions during Q&A. Please provide us with your feedback when you see these poll questions appear on your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded. In the next few days, we will send you a follow-up email with the on-demand links to the presentation deck and the webinar recording. Again, today's webinar, AWS Office Hours, Amazon GuardDuty Tips and Tricks.
Excellent.
How you doing, Ryan?
Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Pretty good, a little sleepy.
All right.
Flew in here from Ohio. Seattle's a little bit out of the time zone. So hey, we've got a couple of questions for Amazon from our audience about Amazon GuardDuty, and one of the main ones is, where does it fit into the total security landscape? What is the thing? Yeah,
that's a good question. So if you kind of look at all the different security relative services that we have, so specifically within external security services, we have 3 services today. Inspector, which is really focused on host level configuration checks, vulnerabilities on your instances. Then we have Macy, which does monitoring for S3 activity and data classification. Where GuardDuty fits into that is it's watching all of the network traffic within your VPC as well as going in and out to the internet, which is kind of unique, right? So we're seeing both north, south, as well as east-west traffic. We're also monitoring the behavior of all of your users within your account by watching CloudTrail activity.
And that's kind of unique, isn't it? I mean, in the industry as a whole right now, we don't see a lot of that crossover.
Yeah, normally you either see something that's specifically focused on monitoring network traffic or something that's specifically monitored on user behavior. But we kind of combine those together with the GuardDuty service.
Cool.
We also have other security relative services in the AWS ecosystem. I did see we had a few questions kind of around how it compares to WAF or Shield. And they're really actually quite very different. Right? So GuardDuty is really more of a detective control. We're sitting out of band. It's one of the nice benefits of GuardDuty is it doesn't make any changes to your environment. There's no agents that you have to deploy, no appliances. There's no change or impact to your performance of your application. So because of that, we're kind of out of band. And so we're very much a detective control. When you look at WAF and Shield, they're very specific at layer 7. So they're very focused on watching HTTP, HTTPS traffic that's going to a web application that you've exposed to the internet.
And that's very much in line with your network flow, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of sitting way out here.
Yeah, it's at the edge, and so the traffic as it's coming in is going to get inspected by WAF for application type attacks. And then Shield is really specific to denial of service prevention and mediation.
Yep, pretty cool stuff. So one of the other questions we have in here is how do we set up master member? You know, one of the customers out here right now said that they've got 60 plus accounts and they'd like to know how to consolidate everything.
Yeah, and we see that with a vast number of our customers, right? So most customers have more than a single account. One of the other things too is, you know, as a security service, a lot of times you are going to want the information that a security service is generating to be reviewed by a security team. Right. Maybe an incident response team or SOC if you have one, or at least just someone who's dedicated to watching the overall security of your account.
And GuardDuty kind of gives you both of the best right there, right? I mean, you can see it from the client side and you can see it from the master side.
Yeah, and so one of the features that we added in GuardDuty was this concept of master member. And what happens when you have multiple accounts is all of the findings that are generated within a member account will show up in the console. So if you're giving access to that console for, let's say, your different business units or a line of business, they can go see the findings that are relative to them. But it would be kind of a hassle if you had to go as the security team and log into every single person's account to see what's going on. So with the master member, all of those findings are also visible in the master account. Cool. So what I'm showing here on my screen now is this is my master. And you can kind of see I've got findings that are showing up from 2 different accounts. One of them is this account itself, and then the other one is one of my member accounts. And in the console, not only that, you can see which accounts I have set up as members to this particular master account. and whether or not the invite has been accepted or not. And you can invite members directly from the UI. So you can go here if you have an account ID and the email address.
Seems like a really slow way to do it.
It kind of, I mean, if you have two accounts though, it's perfectly fine.
True.
One thing I do want to call out is that email address. It's very important. That will only work with the root account. So you can't just put in your email address unless you happen to be the root on that. And the reason is because those findings from that account are going to be visible now to this other account.
So it really is something you need to be very secure about.
Yeah, we want to make sure that the person that's receiving that invite is the actual owner of the account that's getting the invite.
Kind of makes sense.
And so when you put in the account number and that email address, it's going to send them an email. It's going to say that, someone from this particular master account has invited you to become a member, and they have to accept that invitation.
Okay.
You can do that either by clicking through the link on the email and going to the console and accepting it. You can also do it through API.
Okay.
And so for that user that sent the question, they have 60 accounts. Right, you probably don't want to go.
It seems like it would take a while
and
to
do
do
60
it.
that way, right?
Yeah.
Because also you have to remember that GuardDuty, like almost all AWS services, is regional.
Okay.
So you have to enable it in each region as well. And if you were going to set up master and member, that has to be done on a per region basis as well. So again, if I have 60 of those, I don't want to be doing that through the console in that way. I can upload an entire CSV here, right in the console. Okay. So if I have a CSV, you put it together with the account number and that root email address, one per line.
Off you go.
And well, through the console, it will go send all those invites.
That's pretty cool.
But again, now you still have to do that for all the different regions that you want to enable. And we do recommend that people enable this in all the regions. And the reason for that is most people use one or two or maybe a handful of regions. If you had a credential compromise and someone gets your credentials, they're not going to go and look where all of your production assets are and launch their Bitcoin mining farm right there, right?
It tends to make more sense to launch that Bitcoin mining in someplace else.
So somewhere you're not looking.
Someone you're not looking.
Right? If I'm using, US East, right, for example, and that's where my application is, I'm probably looking at that and seeing changes in that all the time. So if I had your credentials and I see that you don't really use Singapore, for example, that's where I'm going to go and launch that cluster because you probably won't notice that till the bill comes. So
we want to make sure we get that pretty quick.
We want to get that pretty quick. Yeah, exactly. So that's why we recommend that you do it in all of the regions.
Okay.
Generally speaking, the way the cost works is not that expensive to have it in regions you're not using because there's very little activity. So to help people who have the 60 accounts, or even we go all the way up to 1,000.
I was going to say I've worked with some customers that have quite a few more than 60. Frankly.
Yeah, exactly. We have lots of customers that have way more than 60 using GuardDuty today. And the primary method that we've seen be very successful for deploying that is a multi-account script that we open sourced on GitHub. I have the link here too, and we'll show that on a slide later. That will take that same CSV that you could have put in the console, but it will do the entire operation for you. So it will assume a role in each account. It will send the invite, and then it will accept the invite, and it'll do it for every single region. So you basically give that CSV to this Python script here, and it will walk through every single region and all of those accounts, enable GuardDuty, and then set up the master-member relationship. It takes about 30 seconds an account to go through all those regions. Yeah. So you can see it. You can do a large number in a very short period of time.
It beats the heck out of having to enter them one by one.
Yeah, it's much easier than going that route. And then, of course, like I said, in the console, you can see which accounts you already have joined there. And then, like I said, in the master account, which is this one, I will be able to see findings across all those accounts. And one other thing that's really useful for this too is, especially when you get to 60 accounts or 500 accounts, you generally want to have some sort of automation or some sort of collection that you want to send these findings to. And so if you have the master member, all of the CloudWatch events that get sent out can come from the master. So you only have to do kind of that wiring up to your receiving platform on the master account, and you'll get all of your findings from all your accounts.
So how do we test this? I mean, what is a good way to get the sample findings to happen? Not that I'm leading you in any way, shape, or form at this point.
Yeah, so one thing that we see that's really helpful to get started, so to really understand what are the findings options that I'm going to see, and especially if you're going to try to take any action on these, you probably want to see what does a sample finding look like. And, instead of trying to sit there and generate 45 findings by doing...
Because it might be kind of hard to go to a Tor exit node and generate a finding for yourself, frankly.
Well, that might not be too hard.
Well, but it might be against corporate policy, potentially. Yeah.
We did add a feature in the console here under settings where you can click a button and it will generate sample findings.
Okay.
So if I just go press that button, it'll basically generate sample findings for one for each. And I can then click on all of these. For example, let's use that Tor one because we just talked about that. And it will show me exactly what a Tor finding would look like from the perspective if it was a real finding. Obviously, this is generated data. But also it's very useful as you can see the raw JSON as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's very useful if you're going to build.
From a builder point of view, I mean, that's just awesome because now all of my remediations, I have got this is exactly what I'm going to see.
Yes, you don't have to guess what fields you're going to see or what, if it's a string or a number, right? So you can go and see all of the information about what a finding of that type would look like. And it really can help you in, like I said, getting your tooling built up, but also just understanding what are the potential options that I might see and what would that look like from a user perspective.
This is also kind of interesting from an operationalization point of view, if that's actually a word. When I look at this, I see a runbook waiting to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the start of my corporate runbook. It may not be perfect, but at least it's, hey, this is something that will happen and I can see what it's going to look like.
It's kind of difficult to build some sort of a Lambda function or something that's going to respond to an event if you don't know what that event looks like.
Right.
So that's very useful for that. Another thing that you can do just to kind of get yourself going or get some feeling on it, we have another open source project that we released called GuardDuty Tester. This also is on GitHub. It's a CloudFormation template. You run the CloudFormation template, it will create a isolated VPC, create some resources in there that are designed to generate a number of findings. It doesn't go through all of them like the sample ones, but these are actually real findings that are associated with instances. So you can go ahead and look at these and see, okay, well, what does a real finding look like?
With an actual instance in my VPC.
With an actual instance and that it's been generated. So that's another tool to help users get going, just to kind of get comfortable with what the findings will look like, what they can expect to see in the console.
Well, and I think that's really great. I think the next thing that comes across here and something that our customers have been asking about is what do we do with custom threat lists? I mean, let's be honest, we all have customers that have their own threat intel departments.
Yeah, we do see that a lot, especially in kind of certain verticals where they have very industry specific. So, with GuardDuty, we have two main methods of detection. We have our threat intelligence, which we have partnered with Proofpoint and CrowdStrike, and then we also have internal threat intel from AWS, and then we have all of the machine learning rules and the anomaly detection that we have. But as you mentioned, we have some customers who have existing either internal stuff, if some of the larger customers have, or they've subscribed to an industry-specific feed. And in the GuardDuty console, you can add that data to it directly. So we have the concept of a threat list. And by adding a threat list, you basically take that feed that you've purchased or that you've generated, put it in S3 bucket. We support pretty much all the good industry kind of standards.
I was going to say, I saw most of them in the sticks struck out.
CSV if you want to do something very simple.
Yeah.
And then we also do FireEye, Proofpoint, and Alien Vault feeds as well. And this goes into an S3 bucket. The only thing to keep in mind, and we had a blog post on how to automate this, is as you update that file, you just need to call one single API on our side to tell us that you've updated it.
By the way.
Yeah. So you tell us if we updated it, and we'll go reread the file out of S3. Nice thing, too, to point out on these threat lists is this is controlled at the master level as well. So if I've got those member accounts, I don't have to go to all 60 member accounts and upload that threat list. At the master account level,
once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, it pushes out to all those. We also have what we call trusted IP list too. So if you wanted to, for example, whitelist a particular IP address or CIDR range, you can upload one of those there as well. And same concept applies, where it applies to all of the accounts that are master member joined.
So we keep talking about master member and all and regions and whatnot. One of the questions that keeps coming up is how much does this cost?
Yeah.
I mean, I love showing off my specific, this is how much it cost me last month, but if you would.
Yeah, so kind of the cost, like a lot of our services, they're cost following, right? So we try to align what we charge customers to what it costs us to provide the service.
This is kind of one of the fun ones too, because I love the look on people's faces when I show them, and this is what it cost me last month.
Exactly. And so the dimensions are based on flow log analysis. So we're analyzing all of your flow logs to get network traffic. I do want to point out too that you don't have to turn on flow logs for us to get access to them. Right? We're getting access to that data from the EC2 team directly. We're analyzing your CloudTrail logs and your DNS logs. So the cost model is basically the number of gigabytes of flow log and DNS logs that have been analyzed.
It cost you a whole cent, huh?
I know, I'm a big spender today.
I tell you.
And then the number of millions of CloudTrail messages. We also, though, recognize that most people don't know how many millions of CloudTrail messages they generate, or if you don't have flow logs turned on, you probably have no idea how many flow logs you're going to generate. So one of the things that we did that's somewhat unique to the GuardDuty service is rather than doing a free tier, which is what a lot of services have, right? You get so many gigabytes or so many hours, including your first year. We decided to make that really frictionless and just say we're going to give the first month free, whether or not it's a penny or a much larger number. The first month for every account in every region is free, and we've added this free trial page that will show you where you are in that trial process. How many days you have left, and then as you noticed, the estimated. This is a smaller account, but
obviously.
the estimated daily cost. So that way, as you're going through your trial, you'll have a good concept of how much it will cost you going forward.
And I think it's important to note that, we said it before, but this doesn't change anything in your account. This isn't adding E&Is. This isn't doing anything funky to the account. This is specifically just looking at the account's logs.
Exactly. Yes,
so
absolutely.
It's really low entrance.
Yeah, and so also after your trial ends, this free trial will switch to usage, so you'll continuously be able to see, even after you move into the paid area.
Yeah. Well, that's actually an important point, is that little tab, that little button at the bottom left there does change in use, right?
It'll change to usage, and it'll show you your live usage once your free trial is ended.
Cool. So now that we've got all of these wonderful sample findings in our findings section, how do we get rid of them?
Yeah. So this comes up too, right? So there might be something or a finding type that isn't super interesting to you. One great example we see is we have users who very sensibly are doing vulnerability assessment in their account, right? That's a good thing to do. And so when you do that, you're going to have port scans, and we're gonna flag on those.
And guess what? That's a legitimate finding.
It's a legitimate finding, but it's expected, right? So you don't want to get paged or something like that because
just for the
because the vulnerability scan that you asked to run is running. So we have the ability to create filters, and a lot of times filters are more of a UI experience or something to just kind of change the view that the user has. So you can see I created one here called Vulnerability Scanner. And it's basically a collection of, in this case, a tag and a type. Okay. So you can get very, very granular and specific by adding multiple filter keywords or filter things that you're going to filter on. But in this case, you can see I've enabled this filter. It's now filtered down to my port scan for this red team instance, which essentially is
obviously.
Yes. But what's also different than just a standard filter, if I expand this, you can see here I have a button that says auto archive.
Gotcha.
And if I enable that, right, so I can go ahead and enable that and say archive these findings, and I save this, going forward, any finding that matches this filter will automatically be sent to the archive, and it will not be sent out CloudWatch events. So another use case that we see this use for is one of the frequent findings that a lot of customers get is SSH brute force, for example. And
which is frankly a legitimate finding.
It is a legitimate finding. What that means is you left port 22 open to the world.
Which don't do.
Yeah. And unsurprisingly, someone's trying to bang on that door. So it's pretty much pointing out an architectural choice that you made, right? That security group is overly permissive. We strongly recommend using bastions or VPNs in order to limit your,
or at least an IP scope. I mean,
to limit,
frankly,
or just limit your office IPs, things that are trusted. But if that's, maybe you're not ready to go tackle that yet, and you don't want us to keep telling you about it, you can build that same filter and then auto archive that entire finding type if you wanted. So you could say, what, I'm not ready to deal with brute force attacks right now. I'm going to go ahead and just push those into the auto archive.
Don't forget about them. Come back and fix them later. But
one other good use case that we see come up is we have a finding type for credential exfiltration.
Okay,
right?
And
that's not something that's good, right? If we're seeing your credentials used outside our instance level credentials, so if you've
like STS tokens,
STS tokens. So you've attached a role to an EC2 instance, and we've provided that instance with a set of STS credentials. If we see those credentials being used somewhere else, like that's not normal.
Red flag here.
Yeah. However, there is an actual use case where that is normal. Right? So some customers, they don't attach internet gateways. They actually route all of their internet facing traffic out to their on-premise area, and they maybe have a proxy fleet there.
Right.
Well, in that case, what we're seeing from a source IP is your proxy.
Yeah.
And so that's why
We actually talked about this the other day, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why we raised that finding is that's not the source IP we're supposed to see that from.
Now, as a point here, we don't want to add that proxy IP back to the whitelist.
No, we can be, again, very specific. I can take this specific finding type and I can whitelist just that finding type using a filter and the IP address of your proxy.
Of your proxy,
Yeah. So I can do that, and then I can also do the IP address of my remote IP and put in my proxy IP address here, if I had one and that was off the top of my head. And,
Obviously, yeah.
and then we would only whitelist or archive findings for instance credential exfiltration from that proxy because we're expecting to see that there. But if something else,
I was going to say, and that allows all the other bad stuff that might come if that proxy was in some way. Yeah.
Hopefully your proxy doesn't get compromised, but
at some point it may.
Yeah,
and
if
this
it
allows
never
us to
did,
see everything else.
then you're covered for that.
Cool. All right. So I think that pretty much covers. Well, I tell you what, there's one more question there actually from the customers. They would like to know what happens on the member side of the filtering thing.
Oh, that's a good question, actually. So those filters that I created, so this vulnerability scanner, this works across all of my accounts. You can see here when I applied this, it filtered on both accounts.
Yeah, both accounts.
And if you're in a master member and you set up these archive rules, those apply to those members as well. And the members aren't allowed to change those. So the idea is the filters, the things that you're saying, we're going to archive these particular findings. We don't want maybe a user just be like, I'm going to archive everything. So
why not?
So what the filtering and the auto archive creation has to happen at the master account level, but it applies again to all of the member accounts. And again, the members aren't allowed to make changes to those.
Cool. I'm going to ask you another horribly leading question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So we've talked a little bit about what GuardDuty does. It looks at CloudTrail, it looks at DNS logs, and it looks at VPC flow logs, right? So what about CloudWatch logs? What about CloudWatch events in general?
Yeah, so that's the other way that we send findings out is through CloudWatch events. So CloudWatch events is like an event bus that allows you to have lots of different targets. So you could do something just as simple as send it to an SNS topic.
Right.
What we see that's more common is using Lambda, for example, to publish that into some sort of a SIM solution.
Start doing some remediation.
Or a ticketing system is another thing that we see. We've also seen sending it to like chat systems.
I've seen Slack integrations, which is kind of neat.
Slack integration is another one, right? Where you can take, and the nice thing about that too is because it's running a Lambda, you can actually then get very granular. Maybe there's certain types of findings you want to just cut a ticket for, and then there's others you want to send a chat notification, right? So you have quite a bit of flexibility in how you handle that. And one of the other things that's we have a setting for that I'll call out is, generally speaking, we aggregate all those findings. So if you looked down at those findings I generated earlier, they had a count of 2, some of these. That means that happened twice. And one of the things that we do to try to keep the noise down is instead of sending you an event every single time something happens, like think about that SSH example.
Yeah.
If you've got SSH over the world, you're going to get a lot of brute force attacks.
And it's not something we really want to see all the time.
And if I send you another alert every 5 seconds that it's still happening, it's not super useful. So we aggregate that and we bundle them together. So as soon as an incident happens, the very first finding, we send that out immediately to CloudWatch events. But if it keeps happening, let's say they're still brute forcing, we're not going to send you another one. By default, we'll wait 6 hours and we'll just increase that count. And if it's still happening within that 6-hour window, we'll send out the CloudWatch event again.
Okay.
However, we do give customers the ability under the settings page to modify that window. So you can say, I want it every hour or every 15 minutes or leave it at the default. And again, that's when we'll resend the CloudWatch event notification. So that way you can process it again in your Lambda. You can update your SIM that, hey, this is still happening.
We can update CloudWatch dashboards even. Yeah.
Yes. CloudWatch dashboards is another good one.
Yeah.
We also have folks that use elk stacks as another common one. We had a blog post recently that had a CloudFormation template actually that if you run the CloudFormation template, it'll set up the whole elk stack for you with a GuardDuty dashboard.
That's kind of fun.
It's kind of a nice, easy way to get,
gets you in, lets you see things. Yeah.
Get some good visualizations of your findings.
Yeah. So great that we have findings. Great that we have a dashboard. All good. What do we do with them? How do we store these things?
Yeah, so we store them for you in the console for
Right.
90 days. We see like a lot of customers sending them, like we said, to SIM solutions.
To a SIM, right.
That's a very common
Yeah.
one. We see a lot of our partner solutions. So we
What
have
about S3? Can we get it to S3?
Yeah,
easily?
so there isn't a native export to S3, but you can, again, using CloudWatch events. So one of the target options in CloudWatch events, if you wanted to send it to S3 and then collect from there, which can be very useful to do that from certain tools, you can use Kinesis Firehose as your target. One thing to keep in mind, so Kinesis Firehose can output to S3.
Okay.
One of the things about how Kinesis Firehose works, though, is it buffers. It doesn't just write every single event directly out. It has a time window that it waits or a certain size. So, if it's 5 megabytes of data or after 5 minutes, we're going to go ahead and just flush that to S3 regardless of how many objects it has on there. The Kinesis Firehose stream doesn't add commas between the JSON events. However, so certain tools will not see that as valid JSON.
Right.
So in order to get around that, there is an option in Kinesis Firehose to use a Lambda transform.
Oh, and then do some ETL.
Yeah. So basically, we have some code we can publish for this as well. That'll take those multiple events that are sitting on the Kinesis Firehose stream,
Right.
and essentially,
Do a little bit of magic.
add some commas to it, put some brackets on the outside, and make sure that it's writing valid JSON when it gets to the S3 bucket.
Always a good thing.
And the nice thing about that too is if you have a tool that can collect from an S3 bucket, very similar to how you would write out CloudTrail, where you could put multiple accounts in multiple regions all in a single bucket, and then you just point that tool to that single bucket, and it can go and iterate across all of the new objects that have been written out there.
So now that we've got all of this stuff written, now that we've got things running in CloudWatch, what do we do with it? How do we remediate? What are the things that happen next?
Yeah, so what to do next really depends a lot on how your architecture is and what kind of responses you want to take. So and also the type of finding, right? So if it's a reconnaissance finding, that brute force, right? That could be something that, okay, we're going to put on our list to go and evaluate our security groups to make sure that we've gotten those tightened up. But let's say it's someone doing Bitcoin mining or...
Which is a pretty severe thing.
Yeah,
Let's be honest.
Well, because the reason that's happening is either you've got someone at your company who's trying to make a little coin on the side, which we hope is not the case, but...
Maybe the company decided to get into Bitcoin mining. It's possible.
But
maybe.
More often than not, what we find when we talk to customers is they had some sort of application vulnerability.
Right.
And it was exploited, and then someone has happily dropped a Bitcoin miner on their box. So... what we want to do in that case is block that traffic. Also, another example for that would be command and control traffic.
Right.
So one of our detections is a malware command and control. So we see traffic that's coming from an instance that's talking to what we know is a command and control for malware. So here's an example of that, the CNC activity. I might want to go ahead and make it so that malware can no longer communicate with that command and control.
I think it's important at this point to note that if you decide to do something at this point, like remediate, you probably need to talk to some other people in your company, right?
Yeah, usually.
Good idea.
Just to make sure that everyone knows that you're making these changes.
Right.
So we do have another example. It was a blog post that we published not too long ago that will show you how, and it has a CloudFormation template. Here's a nice picture of it. That will take those findings, and for findings, for example, on the command and control, we want to break that command and control channel because this is somebody who's be able to control something in your environment. And so in this case, that Lambda function can take the IP address that the instance is communicating with and add a deny rule to the network ACL. So the nice thing about that, right? Security groups, you can't have deny rules.
I was going to say, let's describe what the difference is between a NACL and a security
so security
group.
groups are stateful firewalls,
right?
But they only allow rules.
We're only allowing things.
Yes, and they have a default deny.
Right.
Whereas network ACLs allow you to put an explicit deny. So in this case, what this particular set of functions will do is it will take the IP address that the malware is communicating with, or the Bitcoin mining pool, and it will update the network ACL with an explicit deny. So that way, all of the instances in that subnet will be blocked from communicating outbound to that particular IP address, thus breaking the command and control chain.
Right.
This will also, if you've got the AWS WAF running, it will add an IP blacklist. So if somebody's doing a reconnaissance against you, or if somebody is brute forcing you,
we're stopping it further up the chain. Then,
yeah,
right? We're not stopping it at the actual VPC level. We're actually stopping it at the edge.
Yeah, so it's running on WAF, so it's either at the the ALB or at the cloud.
I guess that's true. It could still be at the ALB, right?
Yeah. but it's still stopping it well before it gets to the instance.
Now, we can't only do this, we can do a whole bunch of other stuff here too, can't we?
Yeah, because it's driven through CloudWatch events and thus triggering Lambda, there's really very little you can't do, right? Like I said, we mentioned
Bato 3 is pretty cool.
We mentioned ticketing systems and sending it to SIM, stuff like that. But if you have a very well-architected, auto-scaling, stateless environment, you can even take more assertive actions. For example, if I could build runbooks and use tags, for example.
You kind of have your user stories all written right there for you.
Yeah. And let's say I have an instance that is stateless. It's in an auto-scaling group. I might want to, for certain very high severity findings, like again, say Bitcoin mining or command and control activity, I might want to remove that from the auto-scaling group, let auto-scaling replace it so we're not affecting availability.
Cloister and forensics.
And then isolate it.
Yeah.
Right? So that way you can go and look at it and figure out what's going on, maybe snapshot the volume so you get a point in time situation of what was happening on that instance. But I always caution people when you're looking at remediation actions that are destructive, you want to make sure that you've built in and understand the business logic behind that, and that you've talked to
everybody else in your company,
your business partners, to make sure, hey, we might be doing this because the last thing you want to do is take a relational database instance and terminate that.
That happened to be going through an upgrade or some such during that's not a happy day.
That's not a good day. So, very good, and with the remediation actions, you're very useful on stateless things that are in auto scaling, because you're not affecting availability then.
Right.
You're simply isolating it and allowing you to do some sort of.
Seems like it would be a really good idea to sit down with internal people at your company and validate with everyone, going through the runbook one step at a time and saying, look, this is what finding we've got here. This is what we think happened. How do you want us to handle it?
Yeah, exactly. Making sure that you've talked to your business partners, and it's not just something the security team is doing on their own. And then when you're testing those runbooks, again, those sample findings, you can regenerate those.
It's true. Over and over again.
So that way you can see how those functions are going to respond to those different things, just to make sure that you don't have any bugs in your code, for example.
Very good. Nobody likes bugs in the code when we're terminating instances. That seems like a bad idea.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah. All right. So as we move on here, we've got a couple more questions. We've got partner integrations and which seams does GuardDuty work with best, and how do we do this? What happens next?
Yeah, so again, because we are integrated with CloudWatch events and can trigger through Lambda or SNS, there's a whole host of different SIM solutions that we've seen customers use. I mentioned we had the elk stack that we've put a blog post out on, but we do see a lot of our partner, we have a great partner community that has built integration specific for GuardDuty that really helps customers get information into those partner tools in a very, very easy way. So on the SIM side, we see a lot of things like Splunk and Sumo Logic.
Graylog 2.
Graylog 2, yep. And all of those folks have built not just integrations, but made it very simple.
Yeah.
And so Splunk has an app specifically for GuardDuty. Sumo Logic also has dashboards for that. Yeah. So you're not having to, just build all of the visualizations. A lot of these partners have.
Well, even the one that you mentioned originally, the elk stack.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff out there.
There's a whole bunch of ways to visualize it. And again, also keep in mind, you don't have to just send them to one spot, right? You might want to send everything to your SIM so you have a record of that. And then again, you might want to take certain finding types that are high severity or high priority, and also send those to a ticketing system. Yeah. And those are normally done again through Lambda and HTTP posts. So most things have RESTful endpoints, and you can just basically publish it out to any of those RESTful endpoints that the tool that you're using has.
Always a good thing. So that kind of leads us to the second question of partners here. We have kind of the question about red lock and alert logic and whatnot, where we have maybe more of the active. Not only are we looking at it in a SIM, but we're actually beginning to react to some of these findings.
Yes. So, in our partner community, we have folks that you mentioned, Redlock, Alert Logic, other MSSPs as well, have started to adopt GuardDuty as a base security solution that they apply across all their accounts, and can take action on behalf of those customers, right? So if you're using something like Redlock or Alert Logic, where you're sending incidents into their tool from other sources as well, right? Yeah. So that's kind of consolidating.
That's it's a different view, really. I mean, you've got GuardDuty plus all this other stuff that you might want to respond to.
Yeah, you might have your endpoint tool that's sending alerts into that. You might have other tools that you're using and that are also sending security relative information. And some of those folks have managed services that attach to it as well. So
outsource.
You can
SOC type of a thing.
And they can actually look at it and review it and go, okay, is this something that we need to wake you up for right now, or can this wait till your second cup of coffee, right?
And that's really what kind of that automated remediation is trying to get to is at 2 a.m. I don't get paged and it's waiting for me at my desk at 9 when I actually
that's
want
the
to get
ideal
in.
situation. Yeah, absolutely.
Because that always happens, right? It's always ideal.
The bad guys tend to not try to do bad things right when you
At
want
noon,
them to.
yeah, I don't know what it is. Never happens at noon. So that's really the end of the questions that we had prior to this session getting started. We're actually going to move into some of the questions that we're looking at from the audience now.
Okay.
If they want to start asking questions, that'd be great. And we'll start looking at what's going on out in the world at large.
So we had a question come in. Can I limit what rules are active, or am I kind of limited to archiving? So the answer to that question is no. You can't turn off a rule.
And to be fair, you really don't want to.
Yeah, you usually wouldn't want to turn off an entire rule. The filtering allows you to do that auto archive, and once you archive it, it goes into that part of the console, so you don't see it. Like I said, the other important part is it's not going to send that CloudWatch event.
Right.
So by creating that auto archive filter, you've essentially turned off that finding type when it matches those conditions.
Yeah, the response to the rule. But let's be honest. I mean, if you turn off the response to that rule specifically and just auto archive, it does give you the ability to look back and say, oh look, this has actually changed. The way it's acting has changed.
Yeah, and that's a nice thing too, is by having it in the archive, you can periodically go and look at the archive and make sure that you're not archiving things that you didn't want to make sure that the filters that you have are appropriate for what it is you're trying to suppress.
It looks like we have some more questions on or around the concept of remediation as well. I actually talked to our marketing folks, and we're going to do another talk more in depth on actual coding of remediations and going through that later. Yeah, we've got a number of the automatic remediations that are kind of out there in the web right now. Yeah,
there's some open source projects that people have committed. We have a few that we've open sourced. In general, the Lambda functions for the actions are going to be fairly universal, right?
Yeah.
There's only so many ways to terminate an instance, or only so many ways to isolate an instance.
I think that's fair. I mean, you look at some of the things there, and I mean, what you're going to come up with is you've got all of these findings from GuardDuty, and you're going to come up with these subgroups that, you know what, if this happens, I want to remediate in this way.
Exactly. And this way is going to be pretty universal across the customer. I mean, they might want to do different things.
Forensics is going to be different for every customer. Certainly.
But the actions are fairly reusable.
Yeah.
Right? And so the code is fairly reusable, right? So, you know, if I wanted to isolate an instance, for example, right? The code for isolating an instance is the same for everyone.
Relatively straightforward, yeah.
What it really takes some thinking and that you have to put focus on, and what we probably should have a more in-depth session on, is understanding how to write the business logic behind that, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's going to be very specific, not only to individual customers, but more than likely individual
portions of a business inside a customer, right?
Or accounts. And again, that's where having those filtering rules is very useful, right? Yeah. And the fact that also in the finding JSON, we have all of that metadata. So I could say if an instance has a certain tag, right, like don't remediate, then you can bypass those things and have a human go look at it, right? And then if there's something that you are okay having an automated action take place for, then you can put a different tag in that, right? So
and we have talked about Lambda at this point. I mean, and that really is kind of that larger hammer, as if you will. I mean, we're acting on the outside of an instance. We're moving an instance. We're doing things like that. You can also use SSM, simple, right?
Systems Manager is another great way if you wanted to use that to run some commands to capture data off an instance.
Yeah, we can do memory captures.
Yes.
We can do
memory captures,
all sorts of fun stuff. Andrew Krug, actually out of Mozilla, has a really cool library that he's looking to talk about here shortly too.
Great. Yeah, like for example, if I told you there's an unusual activity on a port, right? So one of the behavioral analysis we do is on an instance or an instance profile, what ports does it normally communicate on? And that's usually fairly static, right? If you're a web server, you probably
better be 80. Yeah,
take
better
be
443,
and you probably talk to an application server behind it. You probably don't start making random outbound ports on 6666, right? So if I tell you that that's happening, that's something you probably want to go investigate. You might want to trigger an SSM to go and execute a command on that box.
Maybe we're going to do just a procedure list, what's going on.
PS-F, right? So do dump the processes, see what the last history of commands, logins were, right? So that way, before you even start your process, you have more information off that box. So Systems Manager, if you have that agent and you have the role set up for that, can be a really useful way of automating additional data capture. Like you said, you can do memory capture and write that out to S3. There's lots of things that you can do in addition to just, isolating or terminating.
So I'm trying to read this one here that just came in. It was a little bit crunched up. Let's see here. With all the different dashboards in AWS, do you have any suggestions for consolidating the different dashboards or aggregating the data sets? Any quick start GitHub for that? Any notes on the expanding dashboards update at reInvent?
Yeah.
So obviously there's some of this we're not going to talk about.
So,
but
as far as consolidating those, that's where our logging partners and SIM partners come to play. Like so, you mentioned Graylog and Splunk and Sumo Logic. They all take information from other sources than just GuardDuty.
Yeah.
Like I said, Splunk's got a great AWS app. They've got lots of dashboards for things like CloudTrail and CloudWatch and all sorts of different metrics they can collect. So that allows them to bring all of those things together in a single spot. Like I said, most of our partners that are in that space that are GuardDuty partners are partners in general for AWS too. So they work with our other services. And so if you have one of those, that can help you bring that in. Like I said, we mentioned the Elk Stack, right? You could build another dashboard.
Yeah,
we have the one
open source.
Yeah, we have the one for GuardDuty, but you could build a CloudTrail one. You could build other services into that Elk Stack as well.
Yeah, there are a number of them out there. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting to me is starting to look at when we start seeing findings happen repeatedly using the CloudWatch dashboard actually, and using that to evaluate how many times has something happened in the last 5 minutes or an hour.
Yeah.
And no longer are we just looking at did something happen or didn't happen. We're rather looking at the total amount of times that it did happen. So maybe we're used to seeing a specific thing happen 5 times a minute. All of a sudden, it jumps to 20,000 times a minute. Well, okay, something's happened.
Something is off.
Let's look at what this might be. But there are a number of ways to do that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Does filtering work for all regions?
That's a very good question. The answer to that is no. So the filters, like everything, is regional. However, a very easy way to disseminate those is GuardDuty fully supports CloudFormation. And you can build your filter in a CloudFormation. And if you have stack sets enabled on your master account, so you just go to CloudFormation and set it up as a stack set for that account, you can deploy that same filter to all of your regions with one single template with one or two clicks.
Right.
And again, once you do that at the master, it'll apply to all the regions if you did that through stack sets on your member accounts as well.
Stack sets, it's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
We've got another couple of questions about more remediations in here. It seems like people are dying to get remediations done. So, I mean, the reality is that we've got another talk coming up about specific remediations, and we're going to go through a lot of the different remediations that you would have. But, I mean, to be fair, it's going to be a mixed set of we're going to do one of these actions, and we're going to reorder potentially or not use some of them based on specific customer business needs.
Yeah, and also, too, we talked a lot, really focused on the EC2 type ones, but keep in mind, we also do the IAM side of things. So if it's a credential exfiltration, right, we might want to, kill those credentials. Or if we're seeing a login from a country that we know you're not in,
right?
Someone's leaked your cred somewhere, we might want to, again, disable that access key or disable those.
Or undo the actions that you've taken, frankly.
Exactly. And that also could lead you to maybe an Athena query against your CloudTrail.
Right.
So you go figure
what
out,
has this new breached user done?
Yeah.
And
So
how do I undo that?
Exactly.
Right.
I saw some credentials that were used from some place that you don't normally log in, and we know that you're not there.
And I think that's kind of one of the cooler things about AWS. I mean, it's a builder thought, right?
Yeah.
We're going to give you all of these wonderful Lego pieces. And I mean, how many other places could you say that now I'm going to look at everything that this specific user did in the last 45 minutes?
Yeah.
And I'm going to undo all of that programmatically.
Yeah, so you could use something like Athena or your CloudTrail. If you've got a CloudTrail partner, you could use them as well to go and filter on that particular access key and see, okay, what have they done?
And let's go and remediate that.
Exactly.
Each one, off you go.
Exactly.
So we're waiting for some more questions. We've got a lot of thank yous, which is always cool. Love to see that. Okay, here's another one. What are the interesting fields I should be looking at in the findings? I think that depends on the finding, really. I wish I could just say, just always look at instance, but like we just said.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of things here. So I'll share my screen here again. So first and foremost, in the finding, if you look at the different fields, a lot of these are hot links, right, too. They'll take you to that in the console. Some of the things that are helpful to understanding what's going on. First of all, is we list the EC2 metadata. So in this case, tags. So that could give you an idea about what instance it is that's generating that particular their finding, whether or not it's got an IAM role attached to it, which is very important. If there's an instance compromise and it's got an IAM role attached to it, then that compromise now has access to whatever that role does, right? So you want to understand what you have there. But if you look down on the action and the connection, so in this particular case, on this finding, this is an SSH brute force. And we kind of talked about that being not really a big deal, right? However, in this case, this connection is outbound.
Uh-oh.
So that actually now is...
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
So this isn't that I left this instance open to the internet and it's getting a recon attack where someone's brute forcing
Now it's doing the brute forcing.
This is an outbound connection, which means this instance is the brute
kind of
force
important to make sure you look at those findings and figure out, it's the same name, but this one's going in a different direction.
Exactly. But it's also why you can see we rated this as a much higher, right? So normally an inbound SSH brute force would be an informational.
Right.
Where in this case, this is a high severity because it's doing the brute force attack. So it's probably more than likely compromised.
This would probably be one of those interesting moments for the SIM, frankly, where you've actually you go ahead and click the instance and you bring up all of the things that have happened to the SIM in the last month.
So the other things that are in there are like the target, right? So the IP addresses. And if you were being attacked, then that field would show the attacker's IP address. On other finding types, there's, like I said, based on the finding type, it might change slightly. So
I know that one of the brute force things that was interesting to me, I actually had a customer that was having some issues. We noticed that internal that finding was actually from an internal IP address.
Oh, interesting.
And so we had to go take care of someone's laptop.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. On the command and control, right, we'll give you the domain that it's accessing, its protocol, right? So these are, again, things that will help you track down who is this talking to, right? This obviously was a test domain that we set up, which is, so it's not terribly bad, but again, this all came from that tester script that anyone can go run off GitHub as well.
Always good. Let's see. We've seen a few new finding types this week. Can you tell us about the new ones you've released?
Yeah, absolutely. So this week we released 3 new findings. So
Not that came from the marketing department or anything.
One of them was an expansion on Bitcoin. So we had Bitcoin detection that was based on DNS inspection. We also released a additional Bitcoin detection that was based on a combination of IP and some ports. Okay. And we saw really good effectiveness.
On that, yeah.
Well, I guess it's how good it is. It depends on which side of the coin you're on. It's good to know.
No pun intended.
Yeah. So that's a really great detection. We've helped out a lot of customers finding some of that activity in their account. Yeah. The other ones were expansion on our Tor node activity. So we had the ability to detect whether or not an instance was communicating with a Tor node at all.
Do you want to take a moment and explain what Tor is real quick so that people actually understand why we're looking at that?
Yeah. So Tor networks, sometimes they refer to it as a dark web or something like that, but it's essentially
like a really dramatic way to just say a way to hide your identity.
It's an encrypted kind of web browser. You need to have a special browser, and it's essentially routing your traffic through anonymized nodes, which is why it's unusual if you're making API calls in that.
Generally,
fashion.
you don't administrate a server or your
from an
AWS,
anonymous connection.
Yeah,
right?
it's not.
But see, on the other hand, if I'm running a website, it's perfectly fine if my customers or someone who wants to visit my site feels that they want to go through Tor. So that was kind of one of the things that we expanded was we added a Tor relay or Tor caller. And so it's letting you know whether or not an instance in your environment is acting as a Tor node, right? So someone's actually using your instance to help anonymize someone else's traffic.
Which seems like a bad idea.
It's not normal.
Yeah.
No. Or if you're communicating outbound to a Tor node, which again, from your environment, like your servers generally.
Unless you had a request that was coming from, I wouldn't expect that to happen.
Yeah, right? You would. So inbound requests from a Tor are fine, but outbound is generally not good.
Yeah.
Someone is trying to use your instance.
Exfil data potentially.
Probably in a way that they don't want you to see where it's going.
Right.
So that's those are the 3 finding types that we released very recently, and also there's the what news section in our console. Anytime you can check there, and we usually have a blue box that pops up when we have these new findings, so you can see. Here we have the new Tor detections and the new cryptocurrency detection that we have in there as well. But it's always a great place to follow along on the What's New page. So you can see anytime we release either new features to the service or new findings, we'll post those always there as well.
So we have yet another remediation question. Could GuardDuty events be sent to an incident response platform? obviously it could be.
Absolutely, right?
We go through Lambda, so we can send anywhere you'd like.
Yeah, as long as that incident response platform has some
API
way
of some sort,
a RESTful interface or some means
We're going
of,
to send it an email worst case scenario, I suppose you could.
Yeah,
But, not that we want to, but
would be
yeah.
the best way. Yeah.
With all sorts of ways to do that. So I am out of questions, guys. If you guys have anything else, we'll wait a couple of seconds and type them in, absolutely. Let's see. Oh, we got another one. Knew I just had to ask. Oh. Have you discussed at a high level how GuardDuty can work or replace your IDS? So we kind of talked about that at the beginning a little bit.
Yeah.
But we want to talk about IPS IDS specifically real quick.
Sure.
It's kind of a piece of the whole.
It is a piece of the whole. So, GuardDuty does very similar inspection from a network level from an IDS. The one difference, if you look at a traditional network IDS, is it's looking not just at the flow type data, but it's also looking at payloads.
Right.
We're not looking at your payload data. However, in a lot of times we can detect with our threat intelligence and our behavior analysis.
I was going to say, because to be honest, the payload...
Most of it are encrypted these days, too, right? So end-to-end encryption has made payload inspection a lot more difficult.
Right.
It also is a lot heavier weight to do all of that inspection. If you think about the amount of
break
traffic.
and inspect is not a cheap process to run generally.
Exactly. So, we're looking at, source, destination, ports, protocols.
What has this IP done previously?
Exactly. Analyzing that in addition to kind of known threat actors. And then also the behavior analysis, what I said is really an important aspect of being able to detect unknown threats, right? IDS is signature-based, right? Again, it's similar to our threat intel-based detections, where you're looking for a string or a pattern or a known IP address. That's great for known threats, but unknown threats you can't really detect those. You can't make a signature for things you don't know. So that's why I think it's kind of more of a modern or a progressive version of an intrusion detection, right? We're monitoring all that network traffic. We're looking for indicators that compromise or potential intrusion, but we're doing it without inspecting the actual payload.
Right.
But like I said, I think because of the pervasive use of now end-to-end encryption, things like TLS 1.3 and Diffie-Hellman-based key exchange, doing full packet-based inspection is not going to get you as much as it
used to. Yeah. And beyond that, I mean, you start looking at what we're doing, and it's not just that signature-based network traffic, right? We're also looking at those services. We're looking at the other domains that there are to be attacked, frankly.
Exactly.
In a way that, frankly, historically, if you had a data center, they just weren't there to be looked at.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't something you had access to.
It was I'm doing a social engineering attack on the guard at the front door to get myself into the data center. Mm-hmm. Well, now I've got a CloudWatch or a CloudTrail event to say, hey, I've tried to log into your account. Mm-hmm. That's a very different scenario.
Exactly.
So now we actually have a log of the person trying to get in.
Yeah, and I think it also expands, right? So normally intrusion detection, like I said, was really network focused.
Yeah.
We're looking at intrusion from both an API standpoint and user-based activity.
It's a much broader focus.
As well as the network. So we're combining both of those together.
So cool. Same person, one more question, and we're wrapping up. Let's see. Thank you. I have GuardDuty on trial. Minor attack last night. Nothing showing the activity in GuardDuty. Does that mean that I need to request a new threat rule? Probably not.
No, probably not. I would say, if you have a question about a finding, you can always open a ticket to support, and we can help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always neat to find new stuff out there.
Absolutely.
So absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. Thank you so much for your time. Going to go ahead and read our wrap-up script. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap us up today for the webinar. If you have any comments on our previous and upcoming webinars or suggestions on the topics you wish AWS to cover in future webinars, please feel free to email aws-webcasts@amazon.com. Your feedback will help us to improve webinar programming. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Please enjoy the rest of your day.